Hello there, welcome to another edition of the Record Rangers podcast. I'm hosting the day, I'm Douglas Dickie, here to give you the fans' eye view from the Copeland Cantilever, or will be in a few weeks anyway, and I'm joined by Andy Newport, who I'm delighted to say has returned from his European travels. He was over in Spain with the Light Blues over the weekend, having just come back from holiday. I mean, not all heroes wear capes, Andy, but your dedication astounds me.
It's a cool face, I can't lie, Douglas. I mean, listen, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself through that. Not if they would, but there you go. Sometimes you've just got to go the extra yard. So,
listen, that could have been a post-match interview with any player on the SPFL last season. So you must be used to hearing those pointless platitudes every week. So it's rubbing off clearly.
If anyone knows anything about pointless platitudes, it's me, mate. So don't worry about that.
So it's not been a massive week of news from a Rangers point of view. We did take to the field for the first time, obviously, in a behind closed doors game with Kaiser Chiefs, a one each draw, which we'll touch on a bit more later on. But I think obviously that you know what us fans are desperate to hear about right now is new players, and of course players who might be leaving, because there's an awful lot of deadwood to try and get off the books. We're only just over 2 weeks away now for the start of the season. We've already brought in 6 guys, but I think there's a feeling that we still lack a bit of quality in places. There has been some names kind of tossed about in the past few days, both in terms of outgoings and incomings. Can you give us a wee update, Andy, on who, where we are with the state of players?
Well, certainly as we discussed at the weekend, it looks like the first two to be leaving will be John Souttar and Danilo. As far as we're aware, they're still in talks. Interest in John Souttar from down south. I think it's Paphos from Greece that are certainly one of the clubs in the run for Danilo. So we're still waiting for news. They missed out on the trip to Spain, so they could sort of explore those options. So I believe they'll be the first two sort of cabs in the rank to head out. Derek McInnes said to us at the weekend when we sat down with him over in Alicante or Benidorm, that they, some of the work that they're doing recruitment-wise is probably going to have to sort of be paused somewhat until they can get some bodies out. I mean, as you say correctly, I mean, I think I tallied it up. I think right now, if you're talking about senior pros, senior professionals, I think there's a 28-man squad currently on the books, 10 of which are what you might call central midfielders. So, it does show you that they're bloated in some areas. They'll certainly get probably more than they need in certain areas and not enough in others. So, as far as I'm led to believe, I think they're looking at another left-sided centre back. I think they also want a sort of difference maker in midfield. So your Jens Herto Bertal comes into that. Your Draganovic. I think we had a wee debate over how you pronounce that at the weekend. I'm not sure I've quite mastered it yet. Obviously, a Lewis Ferguson as well comes into that category. And then I think wide options is really where Derek McInnes is keen to spend the bulk of whatever remaining budget he's got left. I mean, I think they've only really spent about £4 million so far on these 6 new players. Obviously, I think Ivar Pandur comes in for £6 million, but obviously Hull paid 3 in return for Jack Butland, and I think Robbie McCrory cost just under £1 million. So there should still be plenty of money to spend. A lot of that, though, in terms of where they prioritise it, will depend on Nico Raskin. Again, as we spoke about the weekend, I'm not sure, unless they can get him sold, I'm not sure that they will really push too far out in terms of the positions through the middle of the park. I think, having him on a fairly substantial whack of wages as well, and knowing that, if he does go, he'll bring in a fairly big fee. Again, we debated that the weekend, how big it'll be, but it should still be fairly substantial in Rangers terms. Until they can get that money in the bank, I'm not so sure you'll see much activity in that central position, but I think you'll definitely see them pushing ahead now. As I say, a left-sided centre back, wingers predominantly on the right-hand side, and then if they can, they'll look to bring somebody else in to sort of bulk up or to add a bit of finesse in midfield. But as I say, there's definitely work to be done getting guys out. There's there's been a lot of deadwood collected over the years, and trying to get rid of these guys, as we've seen, has been problematic. I mean, Jose Cifuentes, I mean, it seems remarkable to me that he's still a Rangers player, given he's been posted missing in various loan moves over the last 2-3 years. Danilo sort of maybe falls into that bracket again, just given how far down the pecking order he's fallen. So getting these guys moved on, especially guys like Danilo, who were handed some pretty substantial contracts back in the day. I mean, we're talking about high 20s, maybe even at the 30s, if you take into consideration all the bonuses and things that come with that. So, there's huge amounts being spent on guys that aren't contributing at all. So getting these guys moved on, freeing up wages, will really allow Derek McInnes to push on. I think you can see that this recruitment drive has been done in 2 stages. His first stage was to get in the players that can add the leadership qualities, that can add the steel in terms of the mindset. They can provide a spine to the starting 11. You're looking at, obviously, Pandur's a new goalkeeper, Ben Godfrey coming into the centre-back position, Cammy Devlin and Dan Neil being some real tenacious characters in the centre of the pitch, and obviously Lawrence Shankland up top, being a former captain and obviously one of the best players in Scotland over the last couple of years. That Derek McInnes feels he's now got that spine of a team there that perhaps was badly lacking at times last year. Now it's about filling in the sort of more creative slots around the edges, and I think that's where, as I say, that the bulk of the money that they're going to spend this summer is going to be spent.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've kind of said earlier in the summer that a World Cup year, things always seem to move a wee bit slower because teams are waiting to see what other teams do. The risk with that, obviously, is we've got 4 games to play before the transfer window opens, and you've got to get through them relatively unscathed, because we then play Celtic 20 days after the transfer window closes. So, the squad right now, I don't think it's good enough to win the league at all. No. But
to be fair to Derek McInnes, he did address that at the weekend when we sat with him. He said that he admits himself, there is plenty of work to be done right now. As I say, there's 6 in. I'd expect to see maybe 5 up to 5 coming in. But whether or not all of those will be done before the game against Dundee United in July 31st, what are we, 2-3 weeks away from there? I don't think that will quite be possible. I think they acknowledge that the squad probably won't be finalised before the first day of the season. I think that's just, as you say, I think that happens most summers with most clubs, and especially it's exacerbated when you've got one of these big major tournaments. So I'd expect to see, at least another couple in before the Dundee United game. But I think you'll probably be waiting right up until that. I think it's September the 3rd deadline for the window to shut before you get the full picture of what Rangers are going to look like heading into the first half of the season.
Does that maybe make it a wee bit more surprising, Andy, that we didn't maybe cash in on our Chermiti? We knew that Yusuf Chermiti was subject to a bid from Lyon. We think around about £20 million. I mean, he had his, a season of 2 halves, I suppose. I mean, when he first came in, he looked like he hadn't seen a football before. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, he did show his quality in that second half of the season. Scored some great goals, especially, kind of endears himself by scoring goals against Celtic, always helps from a Rangers player point of view. But, Andrew Kavanagh seems to be playing hardball on that one. And yet, for £20 million, add on what we get from Raskin, you could easily build a championship winning team with that.
Yeah. Well, I'm led to believe that Lyon got in touch with Rangers to ask what their valuation of Chermiti was, and I think Rangers were a bit taken aback by that kind of approach, because I don't think they feel it's their job to be going out and telling clubs what valuation they put in their own players. They will wait for bids to come in, and if they deem them acceptable, especially guys that they're not looking to sell, if they deem them acceptable, they will then enter negotiations. But basically Lyon came in and said, what's your asking price? Rangers said, no, that's not how we do it. You tell us what you value them at. Lyon said no more than £20 million, I think was the figure. And at that point, Rangers said, no, we're not interested, and hung the phone up, and they've not heard back from them since. Also, we sat down with Yusuf Chermiti over the weekend. he made clear he's happy with life in Rangers, and no rush to move. Happy, seems to be quite content so far under the new management, and believes that he's got more to show this season. He said, I mean, you think about it, I think he scored 1 goal before the Christmas period, but then goes and scores 13 in the second half of the season. Chiefly with those number of strikes against Celtic and Hearts. So he's shown he's got an appetite for the big occasion, and he thinks he's got a lot more to show this season. I think it'll be intriguing to see how he and Lawrence Shankland link up. I think having somebody alongside him to shoulder that burden of not just running the lines, but and occupying opposition defenders, but chiefly taking the burden off him to be the main guy scoring goals every season. I think that you'll see him flourish under that. He admitted himself when we spoke to him that he prefers playing up front with a partner. And you saw that at times. His best performances were really when Ryan Nadiri came in, and Nadiri did all his running from him and could drag centre halves away from him and open up that space. So I think Lawrence Shankland, his movement can be so clever at the time, the way he sort of drops off and comes to link up. If you get Chimity sort of off him an option in behind defences, there's potential there to really sort of stretch oppositions. So I think there's Rangers are right to sort of dig their heels in that way. They believe that he would. I mean, we all did sort of scoff at the sort of signing last year, just given how little of a pedigree Chimity had in terms of a goal scorer. But he explains himself he had a lot of injury issues last year. The year before at Everton, he hadn't really played much football. I think you saw that rustiness when he first came in. He looked like a guy that hadn't played an awful lot of football, but bit by bit, week by week, I think he's shown more and more. And he's obviously got this habit of scoring these incredible strikes. I mean, even the last day of the season, he scores a screamer against Falkirk. So, I think Rangers are right to say and go, right, that's a guy that his potential indicates there's a lot more to come from him. We'll hold on to him until either realises that potential at Rangers or somebody comes in with a bid that they feel is acceptable.
We spoke about the wide areas as well. We've been, kind of linked, I don't know how much in it, but linked in Turkey with a move back for Cherny, obviously, who was I was a big Cherny fan actually when he was here. We had many arguments over his usefulness, I've got to say, on the group chat. I thought he was a cracking player, a guy who turned up on the big occasion frequently, but that seems to have been poo-pooed. Mikey Moore now looks...
just on Cherny, I mean, I'm led to believe he's on huge wages out in Turkey. We're talking about over £2 million a year annual salary. So if that's the case, that's like 40 grand a week and upwards. I just don't see Rangers being able to compete with that unless he's willing to take substantial wage drop. I mean, there is talk, I think, of this week that Besiktas are looking at bringing a couple of wingers. So, where that puts him in their plans for next year, I'm not sure. But again, I'm told he really thoroughly enjoyed life here when he was here on loan from Wolfsburg. I think, there was an agreement in place with Barry Ferguson that had he stayed on as manager, he would have seen him sign permanently. I think it was obviously a £6 million fee involved at that point. So it would have been a fairly substantial package. Obviously, the change of management at that time meant that it didn't go through. Obviously, Russell Martin at the time felt he could spend his money better elsewhere. We've seen how that panned out. For me, I agree. I agree with you. I think he should have been signed. I agree with Barry Ferguson. I think he should have been signed. For me, he understood the club and he understood the requirements in Scotland of playing for a big club like Rangers. You have to turn up and you have to win. Obviously, it was a difficult campaign for Rangers that season, but I think he was one of the few players at that time that you could say, right, he's somebody you can go forward with. But just I think unless he's prepared to drop quite a substantial cut in his wages, I'm not sure that one's going to fly.
Yeah, you actually froze on me there, Andy. So I missed a wee bit of what you were saying, but I think I get the gist of it. I mean, I think £6 million looking back on last season, £6 million for Cherny would have been last summer an absolute no-brainer. But that's with the benefit of hindsight. I think he could have made a real difference. Another one is, Mikey Moore, a lot of guys would see him back, but that's looking more and more unlikely, I think, as kind of time progresses. But one player we do have as a winger is Findlay Curtis, obviously, who's just fresh back from the World Cup with Scotland. He scored our goal in our closed doors game on Sunday. Was it Sunday or Monday?
Sunday night, yeah.
Sunday night. It was quite a spectacular goal. I've seen a clip of it, although possibly a wee bit of luck involved. I think
spectacular is one word.
Yeah.
Unfortunate is probably another one.
But he's obviously a guy that went out on loan to Kilmarnock and performed really well. He gets a Scotland call up. Now, my opinion was I didn't really shed any tears when Findlay Curtis went out, because I'm still not convinced against packed defences, against teams defending for their life. It's very different. We don't want to be disrespectful. It's completely different being a winger playing for Rangers as being a winger playing for Kilmarnock. You probably get a lot more space with Kilmarnock. But there's one thing that's undeniable about Findlay Curtis. He seems to know where the net is, and he seems to make a difference. He can fit in and out of games, but when he does get involved, it tends to be something good. It tends to be something that makes a difference. Can we expect to see him in the starting 11 more often than not next season?
I'm not entirely sure about the starting 11. I still think he's a wee bit in the raw side for that. I agree with you. I mean, I think even just what you're saying there, you're labelling him a winger. I think that's a misnomer in a sense. I don't think he's a wide player. He's not a guy that really wants to get the byline and get crosses in. I think he's more like a wide forward who wants to get inside. Yeah, cut inside and get shots away. That's how I see him. That's how I see his future. I mean, to be honest, I think as he gets older, as he maybe fills out a bit more, if he gets a bit more experience, you'll see him becoming out and out centre forward. I just think right now he's sort of shunted out to the side because that's what you do with young players. And I think I don't see he's not a guy with a trick that's going to dribble past 3 or 4 players. He's not your traditional sort of a David Beckham-esque guy who's all about crossing, or a James Tavernier is going to provide a wicked delivery into the box. He's a goal scorer for me, but who just happens to operate in the sort of wider channels. So yeah, I think he's got a part to play. I certainly think he's got a bigger part to play than he did at this stage of the season last season. And it's most arguable that was when he was at his most effective in the first few weeks. Obviously, gets that goal against Panathinaikos in the first game of the season, the Champions League qualifier. But I mean, I do think what I love about him is his attitude. I mean, he's done an RTV video today with the club in-house channel, speaking about how it was his sort of decision to sort of push for that move to Kilmarnock, because he recognised he'd had a taste of the first team under Russell Martin, but he really needed to go and get the minutes under his belt. And I just think that's a terrific attitude. I think a lot of players would think they're in the Rangers first team, they've made it. And he recognises, getting there is only the start of the journey. Now he's really got to sort of push on. So, yeah, he's back this season. Listen, I'll be honest, if Rangers were going out and sign 3 or 4 wingers between now and September, it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up on loan again. And I'm not entirely sure that wouldn't be a bad idea for him again, just to continue that development. He's still, as we say, really young. It's still very difficult for young players to break into a Rangers team, especially when you have that pressure, and a pressure that's growing season by season to win silverware, because of the lack of success that the club has had. So, but I think he's shown at Kilmarnock. He's shown with the glimpses we saw with him at Scotland. Obviously, the goal he scored against Curacao, that he's a guy with talent. He knows where the goal is. His first instinct, which is what I love about him, is get a touch away and get a shot and goal. Obviously, the goal he scores at the weekend, if he meant it, well, then maybe he's a better player than I'm giving him credit for. Not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure he was looking towards the edge of the 6-yard box and the ball flies in the top corner. So, but listen, just getting him more minutes around that first team environment will do him the world of good. And if he can carry on in that sort of same trajectory he was on last year, then yeah, he can play a part this season. I still think he'll have to bide his time. He'll have to be patient. But it's important that Rangers, if they're going to keep him, then they have to get him the minutes that allow him to develop that. As I say, I don't think he'll be in the starting lineup every week, but we know it's a squad game now. We know with these 5 subs you can make, there's plenty of scope to get young players on the pitch and give them that chance. So here's hoping that's exactly what he gets.
Another, just briefly sticking to the closed door game, Dan Neil obviously came out wearing the captain's armband. It is going to be a discussion this season, I suppose. Tavernier away, Butland away, Suter away, or looking like he's going to be away. Those are the three guys who kind of wore it, most often last season. Tavernier was club captain. It seemed to go to Butland or Suter, depending on who was playing. They're all gone. I mean, the leadership team's been completely ripped up. Andrew Kavanagh certainly spoke about, not quite saying it in these words, but filling the team with captains, I suppose. I think maybe in the UK we do tend to overstate the role of a captain on the pitch, but fans want to know who will be that leader on the pitch. Can we expect to see Daniel with that armband, or do you see other guys? Obviously Shankland had been Hearts captain.
I think right now it's probably between Shankland and Dan Neil. It's a toss-up.
Pure Romans as well is another one I've kind of seen mentioned.
Yeah, I think he discussed that at the weekend in terms of McInnes. He sat down with us. I mean, I think you'll find that it's going to be between Dan Neil and Lawrence Shankland. And I must admit, I think the sort of fairy tale aspect of us all said, it'll be Shankland finally getting his move to Rangers, having worked with McInnes last year. But there's part of me that just thinks it might be Daniel. We again, one of the raft of interviews we carried out over the weekend was with Daniel. It's going out tomorrow, so I'll try not to break any embargoes in that one. But what I'll say is that having spoke to him, really impressed with him as a character. A really intelligent guy. Really, speaks very well. But I think crucially showed a real good temperament. And even if I go back to his Rangers TV interview when he signed it, he spoke about wanting that challenge of coming to a big club. I think we can be, we can scoff a wee bit at clubs like Sunderland and say they don't win anything, so they're not big clubs in the sense that Rangers, Celtic are big clubs. But in English context, if you've got a stadium that can hold 50,000 people and you're pretty much selling that out every week, regardless of the level of success you've had, even though they've been down to League One at times in recent memory. They're a big club and they come with their own huge pressures. So him coming up here, he wants that. He wants to feel that intensity. I think you'll find that the intensity is even more ramped up from what he's used to. But the fact that he wants that, he feels he has to have that kind of pressure on his back to get the best out of him. I think that's to be encouraged. It's to be applauded. I mean, I think we saw, especially last season, I'm thinking of guys like Max Arns, Joe Rothwell, who looked utterly shell-shocked by the intensity up here. I genuinely think they thought they were coming up here to stroll it. I had no idea what they were walking into, and it showed. Whereas I think Dan Neil, and again, this is famous last words, this might block my face 3 weeks into the season, but from the first impressions, and this is all I'm going off, obviously, I think he's a guy who gets the environment he's walking into, he understands it. And I think the difference is this time is when you think about Russell Martin and Kevin Thelwell making these decisions last year. I think it's fair to say even those guys weren't quite aware of what they were taking on. I think that's absolutely fair to say, judging by the way things went last year. There's no way that Derek McInnes doesn't grasp the enormity of what he's taking on and the type of characters that is going to be required to do that. So, hence why I think Rangers fans should probably be a little bit more encouraged by Daniel. He captained Sunderland. He was helped get them out of League One into the Championship, and 3 years later he helps get them into the Premier League. Okay, he only played 3 games in the Premier League last season before being allowed to go to Ipswich. Lost his place to Granit Xhaka, but I don't think you can grumble at in the way that he performed last year. Sunderland, having been away from the top flight for 8 years, getting themselves into Europe, finished 7th. I mean, so if you're going to lose your place in the team, it should always be done, and you're hoping that whoever replaces you can, takes the club to new levels. So the fact that Daniel, lost his place last year to that calibre player, it's not to Daniel's detriment in that sense, and I think Rangers fans should be excited by him. From everything we've heard so far, I think that they played a couple of other sort of bounce games at the training ground. Obviously, the one over in Spain, he's been the standout performer so far. So, Shankland, having only just joined up with the squad last week, I think his second session with the team was on Friday night when they arrived in Spain. That was the only second time he'd sort of trained with the rest of the squad. He's still to sort of put his stamp and show his influence around the dressing room. But listen, it's a fantastic headache for Derek McInnes to have, isn't it? I mean, last year there wasn't enough leaders in the dressing room. There wasn't enough guys prepared to stand up and produce their best performances when things were going well, or hold other players to account. We all heard a million times about how James Tavernier wasn't your traditional sort of rant and raver. He was a guy who led by action rather than words. And well, I think Rangers need somebody that does a bit all of that. I think they need somebody who'll go out and perform at his best when things are going poorly, but will also turn around to a teammate and go, "I'll get your finger out because this isn't good enough." And so, judging by everything I've seen from Dan Neil so far, I think he'll be somebody that can do that. Remains to be seen whether he's the one that gets the armband. If he doesn't, I still think he'll act like a captain, even if he's not the one given the honour of leading the team out. So again, as I say, that can only be good for Rangers.
Yeah, I mean, one thing for a club captain, I think they've got to be a guy that's going to play every week or almost every week, and maybe that's where Shankland. I don't think Shankland will play or will start every week, especially maybe in Europe, where we might be forced to kind of go one up top, five in the middle, which brings me to, obviously, Monday is the Europa League draw. Rangers going at the third qualifying stage. I'm just going to bring up this and see the teams we can get. I don't know if I want to attempt some of these, but
I want to get the popcorn out. This should be good.
The aforementioned Paphos, Jagiellonia Białystok from Poland, Hajduk Kralova from Czechia, and Gornik Zagreb, which I can't say because we've played them before, also from Poland. One team we can't get, as I was saying to Andy off air, unfortunately, is Red Bull Salzburg, because they're a team that we obviously know our manager is getting the better of theirs, but they're like Rangers seeded, it would appear, so can't get them. I mean, Europe's been last season apart and 1 half year under Gio in the Champions League. Europe's been a real happy hunting ground for us for the past 6 or 7 years, in complete contrast to domestically where we've struggled. Part of the reason for that, I've always felt, is that our teams were set up for Europe with Europe in mind. I think Clement's team was very much a European team. Gerrard, for his first couple of years, felt like a European team, and it's kind of proven that in the results. I don't think Derek McInnes is going to be like that. I think his team will be 100%, almost 100% focused on Scotland. And I think this year, and I know European football is important, especially with the finance, and I want to see Rangers, especially in the Europa League, and I've said it on this show before, I don't think it's an outrageous ambition to want Rangers to win the Europa League. Certainly not the Conference League if we're in that. But I think next year, I kind of feel like it needs to be in the back burner a bit. We need to try and win some domestic honours.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think I had this sort of argument last year with Scott. He was saying that last year the Rangers should have just sacked off Europe entirely. I thought with the Champions League, I thought in the very first instance, getting into the Champions League was hugely important because of the transformative sort of money that was on offer, especially if Celtic were getting there. Also, that didn't turn out to be the case, but if Celtic were getting there, I thought it was absolutely imperative the Rangers got there too, because allowing Celtic to sort of march further ahead financially would have been, caused real problems. But I think this year, Rangers can only, you only really get huge sums from the Europa League if you go all the way. I think right now the last thing Rangers need to be doing is try to fight on too many fronts. This season, if they don't win the title, that would be Celtic, potentially looking at a 6th straight title, and then the sort of buzz then starts to build towards, and the pressure that, as if the pressure for Rangers to win trophies or win the league wasn't enough already. I think that then adds an extra burden to it. So I think it's imperative that Rangers have to try and get themselves back into a title winning contention this season, and if that means coming at the cost of the European ambitions, then so be it. At the end of the day, Rangers, it's not about money. It's not about playing in Europe. Rangers are about silverware, and that's the way it's always been. And to be fair, if there's anybody who understands that, it'll be Derek McInnes. So I think if it comes to I think it would be pretty unlikely they miss out on group stage football, whether it be Conference League or Europa League. I think that would be a pretty major misstep in Derek McInnes' first few weeks. But I think if he gets into a group stage, if it comes to a big Old Firm game and there's a European game before it, I'm not sure he's going to be putting out his strongest side. I think he realises that where he's what the bread and butter is and what he's got to take care of first, and that is domestic matters. Yeah, I
mean, absolutely. And I'm one who's kind of spoke up Europe in the past, but this year I really feel like it's got to be league first. The league's your bread and butter. I had a wee wry laugh to myself when you spoke about Dan Neil and you're talking about Sunderland and he's coming for a club that don't win any trophies. Well, Andy, we're a club that don't win any trophies at the moment. It certainly feels that way. It's been a wee while, and we need to start. A lot of guys I speak to say all the time, it's all about big shiny things in the trophy room. That's that's all that matters. And if Derek McInnes can provide some of that, then he'll certainly be on the right path. Listen, we'll wrap it up there this week. Hopefully we'll have plenty more to talk about next week. Maybe not new signings, but maybe some outgoings, some of that deadwood we were talking about. Just a quick reminder to everyone that Oscar Cortez is still technically a Rangers player. If you want an example of our rather foolhardy transfer tactics in the past few years.
You've just sent a collective shudder right across down the spine, right across Glasgow.
And yeah, I remember his first few games under Clement, Hearts at home, Rugby Park.
Yeah.
And we thought here we go, but wasn't to be. But anyway, thanks very much, Andy, for joining us. And we'll catch up with you next week.